Well, hello and welcome into this very special episode of the Movie Burner podcast. I don't know what we're calling it. We've still not really got a name for this, to be honest with you. But it's a podcast, Stephen. And on this occasion, we're going to dive down a sort of conspiratorial route, Stephen. It's one of the great conspiracy theorists regarding arguably greatest melodist to ever walk the earth, one of the greatest singer, songwriters, musicians, just force of nature when it comes to music, James Paul McCartney. Of course, there's been a long-standing conspiracy. Lots of people have delved deep down the rabbit hole in regards to Paul is dead. And there's been blogs and there's been videos explored this. Stephen, we have spoke about this off camera a lot, and we've dabbled with brief little things on camera. So we thought we'd do an interesting little discussion on it, and obviously our thoughts on it. We'll try and stay on the fence in regards to what our thoughts are until perhaps the end when we get to some sort of conclusion, whether we believe in it, don't believe in it. It's really interesting though, Stephen. Did he really die in 1966? Was there a car accident? Did the state cover it up and replace James Paul McCartney? I know his name's not known as James to everyone, but that is his name, Paul McCartney, with a double from Canada, who looked the same, sounded the same, played the same amount of instruments, had the same vocal range. I don't know, Stephen, what is your thoughts though before we delve deep into this? There's going to be several sort of parts we're going to touch upon with the Paul is dead conspiracy theorist sort of side of things.
John, I first came across this rumour, I think, probably in the mid-1990s, around about the time of the anthology. Funnily enough, I think it was maybe just before that. I think round about the time the BBC album came out on cassette and CD. I think that's probably where I started my sort of deep dive into the Beatles and would never return out of that magical mystery tour. And I think it's something that just obviously pre-internet, so there wasn't the sort of engagement that you're getting now. So it was mostly in books and magazines, music magazines. This kind of rumour was going about for quite some time, and it was quite interesting, John. You and I love a good conspiracy theory, and we try and be as open-minded as we possibly can on certain things, as long as we have all the evidence in front of us and we can sort of weigh it up and make our own minds up. And that's what we're going to hear. That's the purpose of this discussion tonight. And I think it's a great one because we're big, massive fans of the Beatles, which makes it even easier to talk about. Yeah. And we're trying to keep this to an hour, but we'll see how that goes, because every time we talk about the Beatles, it does not last an hour.
5 hours, yeah.
Yeah, and I know we'll get into obviously the hidden lyrics and the images from certain albums, and radio disc jockeys from college students, who announced this in '69, and the reaction of each Beatle as well on these rumours. How they took to that, and how they dealt with it over the years. But it's something that's never went away. That's the most intriguing part about this. This has been going on for the best part of 5 decades.
Steve, that's the Beatles. The Beatles as a legacy, their lasting impact on pop culture, on music, on worldwide society, but certainly Western society, is something that is seemingly immortal. It's generational. It gets passed down time and again to new generations. Their music is actively celebrated and loved. It's timeless. You hear certain bands from certain eras, and you can identify right away, that's the 60s. I always maintain the Beatles, certainly the rooftop stuff in 69. If you were to listen to that music and look at them as 4 guys, you wouldn't be able to identify that was the 60s. It's not until it pans down onto the street and you see the cars and all the regular folk that you realise, wow, it's 1969. So they as a band are immortal, and their legacy and their impact on the world. I think that's why this is maintained the legs that it has. The Paul is dead thing, just the sheer importance of the Beatles as a band, the pop cultural sort of muscles that they have generationally, and Paul is a sort of primary architect alongside John Lennon in that particular band. His importance, I think that's why it has so much legs and people are so interested in it 5 decades on. Stephen, talking on that, we have got some kind of bullet-pointed system so we can keep semi-coherent here. And they kind of touch on that in this little bullet point we've got here, where the Beatles were creatively and culturally in the 1960s. And of course, the era in which Paul is rumoured to have met his demise, 1966, very much post-Beatlemania at that point. The sort of hurricane, tornado-like storm that followed the band everywhere, they were in the eye of a storm everywhere they went, and there was just chaos around them. That had dissipated somewhat by 66, so I'm starting to think about becoming a studio band and foregoing live touring. And I think a lot of that gap in 66 from Rubber Soul and Revolver into Sgt. Pepper's, I'm pretty sure it was Sgt. Pepper's that came after, then it was a mini LP with Magical Mystery Tour. There was quite a gap, about a year gap I want to say, 67, stating the fucking obvious. And obviously there was a lot of rumours over where the band were going creatively. Were they actually a singular unit at this point? Were they splitting up? I think that's where it started. That gap, the mystery surrounding the band, where the world was post-Beatlemania.
Yeah.
There was rumours where they started to wane their influence on things. Also, we know in hindsight they exploded again.
Yeah, of course. But I think if you look at the consistency of the Beatles from 1962, obviously when Please Please Me came out, right up to 1966, they were just churning out album after album, touring all over the place, and then that all became it was a sudden stop to it, and this is, I think, when I look at the Beatles' history from 62 to 69. That period you're talking about, if that was a book, it would be the centre pages. That's the middle part of this journey. And that's when everything changes. And the funny thing is, John, you talk about obviously that gap between Revolver and Sgt. Pepper. Physically, they look different. And it's funny because the focus is on Paul McCartney, and that's what we're talking about tonight. But in terms of appearances, the Beatle who changed the most was John Lennon.
Yeah.
From that sort of Rubber Soul, Revolver period to what he looked like, in 1967.
Steve, we need to bookmark that mentally. We need to make a mental bookmark of the reasons why John was so dramatically different. There was a haircut that took place when he went to shoot How I Won the War, and that completely transformed the entire look of the guy. Also the facial hair. We'll need to keep that in mind moving forward, because there is someone got a theory as to why people are so caught up in Paul and why that may be the case, and it is down to hairstyles again, but we'll get into that later on.
Yeah. The other thing as well about appearances, John, that Paperback Writer is probably the most intriguing part about Paul's appearance, obviously the missing tooth. You can see it clearly in the video, and that was the reason that he grew the moustache. He was the first one apparently to grow a moustache in the band, and the rest followed. And the reason he grew that was to hide the scar. From obviously, I think it was a motorcycle, a moped, I can't remember, a scooter accident. And this is where it all the seeds were planted. That this was the moment. When it started to unfurl, in terms of this conspiracy. So it's a very important moment in the Beatles' history, and particularly for this conspiracy as well, is that moment.
Culturally, Stephen, a very important moment in terms of Britain and just the world in general. They were becoming more unshackled. I don't know what happened with my camera there. There wasn't the sort of stuffy conservatism which sort of was ever present in the 1950s. As we moved deeper into the 60s, a lot of experimentation with drugs and psychedelic drugs in particular, and obviously the way that changed people's views on the world, the way it maybe changed people's perceptions of reality. Maybe there was a sort of contingent of people looking for things and looking for mystery and conspiracy and everything and anything. Obviously, the reality of JFK getting assassinated and the whole conspiracy that bred out of that seemed to be in the moon landings as well. The 60s seems to be a real sort of, ground zero of conspiracy theorists. There's a lot came out of it. And I don't think you can discount psychedelic drugs and people being high as a kite and having their sort of state of mind transformed as being one of the logical reasons behind that. And obviously the lasting impact as these people grew older and they took their sort of beliefs with them. They impart it on their kids and on future generations. Most people probably dissuade it and say that's bullshit, but there's a sizable element of people who will keep a hold of those conspiracy theories, those sort of beliefs passed down, and that's how you've got the legacy as well. So I think a lot of it, you talk about the culture of the Beatles and where they were as a band. I think the way society was is a large factor in why we get to where we are with this conspiracy. Stephen, though, the conspiracy itself, when it begins, 1969, the rumour, I believe, is introduced. You said it was a disc jockey from a local university.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's when it became. I don't know if it just became a more sort of widespread conversation, but certainly, you know, that's part of the thing I read. You know, was obviously the student disc jockey. But I mean, there's moments before that, John. Obviously, you know, the Walrus was Paul and all that kind of thing from Glass Onion was prior to 1969. So the Beatles were playing around with a lot of these sort of myths. You know, even before this became a sort of mainstream conversation around the world. You know, but where it started initially, I don't know. That seems to be one of the sort of standout moments was obviously this disc jockey. But I mean, it obviously was happening before that. Obviously, there's a backstory in this disc jockey is looking at the album covers, the lyrics, and piecing it all together and stuff like that. But if the Beatles were in it, you know, in terms of the sort of wind up, you know, as good Liverpudlians are, they're good wind up merchants. They were very good at doing that as well, particularly in the White Album. Magical Mystery Tour, I would say as well, and Sgt. Pepper, the cover, you know, but in terms of lyrics, in terms of it coming from the horse's mouth, i.e. the Beatles, it was probably the White Album, the year prior to this disc jockey conversation.
And also Sgt. Pepper, Stephen, with the cover. And the notion that they are rejuvenating themselves as an act and becoming a fresh band with fresh sort of alter egos. And we know that Paul in particular, John as well, but Paul certainly loved an alias and still does love a good sort of alias. The Fireman, I believe. And I think he's wrote, perhaps have been involved in novels under different guises. So this is a guy that's no stranger to assuming different personas to try and avoid the baggage that comes with Paul McCartney and the brand. So
that's that.
So even going back to Sgt. Pepper's, this is something that was definitely present prior to 69. There was clues being left. But we'll get into that, Stephen, as to obviously what they were doing, where the Beatles involved. Was there a sort of knowing, were they maybe putting feelers out and influencing certain people to create this story? Because obviously with notoriety comes interest, and interest comes buying albums, and that's more money for them. The actual details, Stephen, obviously it's claimed in 66 Paul died in a car crash, and it was covered up by the state. I don't know if it was the US or the British. I think there was rumours it was Secret Service, MI6, MI5 here. Covered the death up because of the ripple effect that would happen if a figure of Paul standing was to be lost. Obviously after the death of JFK as well, how that shook American society, and the Beatles moving in the wake of that and giving them hope again and something to cling on to. If you were to then lose Paul in that situation 3 years later, it could maybe cause social disorder. It may cause financial losses as well to the state over here, the amount of people coming over, the love affair with the Beatles and the brand and the band and their songs and everything, the influence they had. So there was rumours that he died in 66 of a car crash or in a car crash, and that obviously the state covered it up and replaced him with an imposter, Billy Campbell, aka Billy Shears from Canada.
And we know that from the lyrics and Don't Pass Me By, you were in a car crash and you lost your hair.
Yeah.
Ringo, you know, this is what I'm talking about. It's lyrics like that. Although I don't think that's directly at Paul. I think it's just playing with words, you know, and it's just that sort of having fun with these rumours. But yeah, I mean, it's absolutely right, you know, and I think anyone who would not believe that an organisation could do something like that, I think that perhaps maybe a wee bit naive, because these things I don't think are without possibility, you know. And those, for those reasons you just said, you know, it's having that impact on society, and just how important were the Beatles. Are we maybe just over-analysing it, maybe overhyping them? I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I think if you if you speak to anybody, that's even out with a Beatles fan, will understand and appreciate their significance and the part to play in music history. And not just music history, but cultural as well, and the impact they had, particularly in the 1960s. So you can see it from that perspective, this is what makes it interesting, John, because I found myself going down a deep dive into these
multiple times.
And not just the Paul's Dead one, anything that's got enough sort of things to cling to and are interesting and are balanced. Sometimes I do go down those journeys and I go, something that kind of starting to believe this,
Yeah, the pyramids is a classic one. Pyramids and aliens and also the moon landing and JFK. There's so many. I mean, there is something deeply interesting. Yeah, there's something really interesting in the concept of a conspiracy and the state being involved in covering it up, and for whatever reason just desperately refusing to give any kind of disclosure to the wider public. It's something that's fascinating. And obviously with Paul, I mean, it's particularly fascinating because we're such big fans of the Beatles. Stephen, what he says there about it not being out with their sort of influence or their desires to cover it up, you just need to look at the effects that John Lennon's death had on the world. And we're talking 10 years after the Beatles had ended as an entity. There was people travelling all around the world to come to New York. It was like a mecca, singing, and it really deeply impacted people. We're talking about in the middle of the Beatles' heyday, 66, right at the top of their game.
I think they were saying maybe about 200,000 people were in Central Park for that memorial service. 200,000 people from around the world.
That was 10 years later.
For a guy that they've never met, that speaks volumes.
Could you imagine Paul passing in 66 in the middle of the Beatles' mayhem, right at their greatest moment? Stephen, I like to joke that, and I probably still stand by it, to be fair, that Fall, if he is indeed a real thing, is arguably better than the real Paul McCartney, because we're talking post-66, but then we were talking before we come on, and you're talking about Rubber Soul and Revolver here, which are widely regarded as perhaps the greatest Beatles albums ever put out. So you're talking losing Paul McCartney after Rubber Soul and Revolver, that would have had unbelievable repercussions on society. So I wouldn't put it past the state and the Secret Service thinking this guy's too important to lose, we need to do something here, and trying to find someone who looks really close. But of course...
So John, for anyone watching right now, please watch this to the very end. That's all I'm saying. It's not tinfoil hat brigade here. Please just watch this to the end. We're doing this as a balanced argument and a balanced investigation. So there is going to be some far out stuff that we will obviously discuss, John. There's going to be stuff that we can, maybe just put in the bin in terms of certain things that we've watched in terms of videos and stuff like that over the past couple of weeks. But just folks, stick with us. It'll be worth it at the end.
Yeah, I mean it will, because Stephen, look, you have to be balanced when you're dealing with something like this. You can't just assume that it's bullshit. You've got to look into it with detail, and there's been times where I've studied it, and I've studied and went down rabbit holes with this a lot of times, and I've been swaying one way or the other, because you look at images and you're like, and we'll get into the images. I've got images up just now where you're like, I didn't realise a chin could change shape like that. I've heard of noses and ears kind of changing as you get older, and obviously things can happen to a face as you get older, but chins, I've never heard of a bone structure changing. And certain times you look and you're like, don't fucking know about that. So look, we're very much going to remain impartial until we're not at the end. But Stephen, obviously we've got here why it caught fire, media attention, kind of touched on that. Obviously paranoia, coded messages and albums, and Stephen, this is where I think we get into the sort of coded messages. Obviously the most infamous one that springs to mind for me is the cranberry sauce moment at the end of A Day in the Life. Oh, sorry, Strawberry Fields Forever. A Strawberry Fields Forever. where it sounds like I buried Paul. Now, obviously, we can look at this as literal as cranberry sauce. I believe they were out of Britain at the time. I don't know if that's completely accurate because they certainly filmed the video in Britain. But I believe they were away and Mr. Lennon was getting cravings for cranberry sauce and home comforts. And he literally says it, cranberry sauce. Now, of course, we know that they are no strangers to playing funny buggers with the general public. And he certainly said it in a way where it can be misconstrued. Certainly back in the 1960s where listening devices weren't anywhere near as high fidelity as they are now.
I think the release of that probably would have been a little bit harder to pinpoint the actual phrase. But if you go on to Anthology 2, I think it is, Disc 1, it's got the actual, unaltered, no effect on the voice or anything like that, and clearly it's cranberry sauce. But I think you've got to take yourself back to the actual singles release, because it wasn't on an album, of course. And you could forgive, the general public for mishearing that, because it does sound like, it does sound like that. But I think, anyone that's listen to the Anthology version, that does obviously knock that in the head. But it's little things like that like the likes of this DJ and many other people that were pinpointing, they were going down this rabbit hole to investigate every single, every release, every album, every image, everything they said in interviews, to see if there was anything they can catch them out with. And that's what makes it even more interesting, that people have dedicated a lot of time. There's YouTube channels dedicated to this stuff. There's websites dedicated to this stuff. John, I know we've got obviously Wikipedia open just for reference as well, and that is one long page on the Dead, because there's so much to it. And one of the things I do like, John, I do like talking about it, and it's certainly something that I do like, and I would like our audience to participate and let us know in the comment section about what they think about this. Did they believe this conspiracy, or did they not believe it? I'm very interested to hear what people have got to say about this.
Stephen, we know, going back to 67, Lennon was aware, and if Lennon's aware, the other members are aware, that people were looking really deeply into lyrics, because we know he created I Am the Walrus as almost a rebuttal to that. It was fucking gibberish. In his mind, it didn't really mean, at his mind, I'm doing the whole John is dead now, because that was another rumour that came out at the time, that John had died as well. I heard a double, and he get bored with his mind. Fucking hell. He was aware of the gibberish, the sort of deep insight in people studying it and giving lectures on the meaning of the lyrics. So he went out to pen a song that meant nothing to muck around with them. So we know, and that's literally on Sgt. Pepper's. No, I'm fucking losing my mind. That's on Strawberry, fucking Magical Mystery Tour. It's very late. I've had a long day. Do apologise. Bear with me. I'm a Beatles fan. I can stress. One of the top fucking quizzers on that quiz app back in the day. I was like number 2 or number 1 in Britain, so I know my shit. Believe me. So we know he was mucking about as far back as 67, sort of misconstruing things, contorting things to put people on the back step, if you like. Stephen, though, bringing this up here, I'm intrigued to bring this up. Obviously, we have the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band cover. There's a couple of things going on in here, Stephen, in regards to one, James Paul McCartney potentially not being with us at this point. Obviously, they say in this breakdown that it's Billy Shears and his hands over Paul's head. I didn't realise that was Billy Shears behind there. Obviously, Billy was a made-up character. I'm pretty fucking sure he was. He wasn't a real person. Paul made him up. But I presume this is the sort of visual representation of Billy Shears. He's got his hands over Paul. Certainly, regardless of the identity of the chap behind, Paul very definitely has a hand raised above his head. That's obviously highly symbolic. Clearly, they are looking over a grave. Quite clearly, the Beatles, but again, double entendre galore on this album. Literally, Paul working with, I believe, who was it he worked with to come up with this concept?
Neil Aspinall came
Neil
up with the
Aspinall.
sort of, he came up with the sort of concept of making it a continual
Yeah.
sort of
Performance.
performance, yeah.
Yeah. But Paul came up with the
And I
concept
think
of
Paul said, "Don't be a smart ass."
yeah. And they kind of did it for the first 3-4 songs. But I think it was Paul, to be fair, that came up with the concept of them taking on a new persona. And obviously that album cover's representing this new fresh band, a new era for the group, and they're looking down on the sort of cold dead corpse of the old Beatles. The conspiracy theories are looking into this and they can see the Beatles to the right-hand side from the Beatles' perspective, our left-hand side. And they're saying that, look, Paul died, the Beatles are sad, they're looking down. They're holding Paul up. That was the other classic thing. The rest of the Beatles very much standing in a way where they're kind of holding him. And he looks like he's maybe fucking dead. That was another rumour that came out. What did you make, Stephen, when you first went down the rabbit hole with the whole Paul is dead? Was this something that you immediately sprung out to you as having perhaps some credence? Could you see where the conspiracy theorists were going in terms of the visual clues here? Obviously, there's something with the drum as well. I think there's something going on with the drum as well. There's a whole host of clues in this album cover. Is that something that you bought into initially? Or did you...
Well, I don't know. I mean, I'd like to keep an open mind, but you've got to remember that, you know, being a big Beatles fan, I knew their catalogue before Sgt. Pepper, so you could see the progression leading into this concept. Perhaps not, you know, the way it came out, but you could see the experimental music and effects on their voices and on instruments in Revolver, as we know from Tomorrow Never Knows, and Taxman, and songs like that. So when it came to this album in terms of its sort of, I don't want to say weirdness, because there's nothing weird about it, it's just a progressional sound. But yeah, I mean, the whole dressing up in the military uniforms, and there was an old-fashioned feel to it as well. You know, old-fashioned from the 1960s, looking back to a bygone era, you know, at that time. And I think perhaps maybe there's a creakiness to that, and I think perhaps maybe this album cover does have a bit of creakiness, because I think a lot of the figures that are in the album were already passed on at this point. So there's that level of sort of strangeness to it. In terms of the music, I didn't really see too much in that, to be honest with you. It wasn't really till deep diving down further, you know, in the White Album and on Abbey Road as well. But John, there was an image that does keep me out, you know, and it was probably one that does the White Album. No, it's well, there's that one as well. That's the that is a creepy image.
Even like stopping on that, it's the reflection in the van.
Yeah, and people say it's a corpse van as well. It's a, you know, carry, you know, one of those black ambulances. But it's an image that's in the White Album's fold out, you know, the pull out, and it's skeleton.
I'll go back to a duel of us and I'll try and bring it up.
It's skeleton hands on Paul McCartney.
Yep.
It's freaky. I'm looking at it now, and it just looks like death. It came from. I think it's a young Paul McCartney. I don't know what period it was from, but if you type in skeleton hands on Paul McCartney, you'll get it. It's there, you know, and it's such an unsettling image. But in terms of Sgt. Pepper, not so much. Maybe some of the images on the album cover was a little bit unsettling for me, but it's just something a bit weird.
Oh yeah. Is it this one? That is fucking odd, to be fair. Is it this? Am I bringing up the right one here?
That's the one, yeah.
That is really fucking weird. That's really weird. Yeah, I mean,
it's like the skeleton through the conga with him.
Yeah. It's the way Paul's kind of standing as well. He's kind of doing that thing. One thing I loved about Paul, and it continued into Let It Be, if you believe it's the same person, is his propensity for being quite physical as a person, and often liking to sort of carry on and cling on to things and climb. We've seen it in the Get Back documentary where he get bored and start just climbing over scaffolding. That's something he seems to enjoy doing quite a bit. It's fucking amazing.
On Walsh during the Fill in the Hill, you know?
Yeah. There's so many things, the guy. has been renowned for doing, and that's why ultimately we'll get into it at the end. There's a whole host of things that can kind of connect in as to why I think the way I think personally.
I think you need to bring up the freezer bird one though.
Freezer bird, yeah. You know what? I'll try and you'll see my horrendous type here. I'm going down a fucking Paul. I'm going to search up Paul McCartney face because I feel like that's what we're going to be. Oh fuck.
Yeah, that's the one. Actually, it looks like Ringo a bit.
Yeah, it's awful, isn't it? Can I get a higher quality version? Not really.
Because it was
myself. Yeah, I mean, see, to be fair, Stephen, it does look like Paul. It definitely does look like Paul. You can see, and I'll try and bring up my mouse cursor up. You can't see the mouse cursor.
Oh, if teletext drew him.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you can kind of see the eyes, you can see the nose, you can see like lacerations, then the mouth. It kind of does look like Paul, but again, by this point, you're that far into the sort of rabbit hole. Why would the band even want to continue on with this? This is like 93, 94, 95, early 90s. Yeah. So, I mean, you're that far down the rabbit hole. Why would they want to continue perpetuating this? They'd want to just sweep it under the carpet by this point and poo-hoo it and say, this is bollocks. Why would they even put that in there? But then it does look like him.
If we're looking at a balanced view here to sort of squash it, you could say it's just a reflection of the trees, because obviously if you watch the video, there's a lot of trees in the street.
I mean, it clearly is trees when you look at it.
Yeah. So
there's a name for that, isn't there? What's the name for that phenomenon when you kind of piece a face out? But it just so happens to look exactly like Paul, though.
It's human nature, John, that we try and identify objects with a face, and it's almost 9 times out of 10 a human face you're looking for, and 9 times out of 10 you'll find that somewhere.
It's just the fact that it's not Paul, though, isn't it? It's really weird.
I think as Ringo.
You're adamant that's Ringo, aren't you? I'm not seeing Ringo there, Stephen. I feel like you're trying to save me here so I don't have a nightmare tonight, but that definitely to me...
I'm trying to throw Ringo under the police van.
Yeah, oh God, I know. Well, Ringo's very much still here. You can't deny that's Ringo, that's for damn sure. He's much harder to replace with those really deep sort of baritone vocals. Obviously, there's whole hosts of other clues, Stephen. I believe the I Am the Walrus backward message. I don't know if I'm thinking about the same one. When I think I Am the Walrus, I think of, untimely death. But people usually associate that with John.
Is that All You Need Is Love?
What's that?
All You Need Is Love? I can't remember.
Oh, Untimely Death? Well, I thought that was the end of
I Am the Walrus. I couldn't remember.
Yeah, because it's like the sort of radio
thing. The one in All You Need Is Love is Yes, He's Dead. Yeah, at the very end.
So, I mean, at this point, and obviously Revolution 9, Turn Me On Dead Man's another classic one, but Revolution 9 is certainly not a track I would be using as sort of reference for any clues of anything, because I am absolutely adamant it's George Martin that starts saying, you bottled a carrot for me, bitch, or something like that. I'm convinced it's George Martin. I'd have bottled a carrot for you if I knew you were coming, you bitch. I'm convinced that's what I hear. It's not what I hear. It's certainly not George Martin. It's archival footage from God knows when. So,
I mean, that's at the end of A Day in the Life.
A Day in the Life?
It fades out and fades back in again at the end of the album.
Sort of thing right at the end, isn't it? There's like 25, 30 seconds of nothing, and then it's ha da 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 ha. Oh God, what is it that says again? I can't remember what it says.
I can't remember, but I remember being on.
It's clearly Paul laughing.
Yeah, I remember being on a bus walking home from work, and I was that kind of sleepy way. My head was on the window, and I had my headphones on, and I was just listening to Salt and Pepper all the way through. And that's how long I was on the bus for. My journey. I could listen to the whole album, and I got to the very end, and I was kind of nodding off. And just as A Day in the Life finished, and then that kicked in, and I didn't know that at that point that it was in that. Because I hadn't really listened to it that much, and it freaked me out. I actually thought it was I thought it was like demons in the bus. It was absolutely terrifying.
I'm trying to remember what it goes like. I know it's like, it's clearly Paul McCartney's laugh. You can't miss that laugh. And it's like, you never knew.
Anyway, he couldn't. I can't remember what the words were.
I think there's definitely links perhaps to Paul in there. Steve, I'm going to bring this up. Obviously, this is the other classic album cover that we often refer to when we talk of Paul and the conspiracy. There's a couple of things going on in here. Obviously, Lennon's representing God. He's dressed in white. Ringo's representing the funeral sort of pallbearer, the sort of funeral fucking director kind of guy. He's wearing the suit, very traditional suit. Paul is barefoot, which is traditionally a symbol of death. And he's kind of wearing a suit. You would perhaps, I mean, I'm not disparaging Paul's fashion sense at this point. Certainly crisp individual, always was to some extent. Kind of lost his way in the mid-70s if it was still Paul. But
top.
Yeah, wearing like scarves and really skin-tight black tops and whatnot. Bell-bottoms. Can't speak about that though, because we know John in the Mind Games video infamously wearing massive high-heeled shoes with bell-bottom trousers, so it was certainly in. I digress. George is clearly the sort of gravedigger. This is what they've denoted George's style as. I just thought George was rocking double denim with a nice little suede pair of boots, looking dapper as hell, but he's been denoted as the gravedigger. And then, of course, behind we have the L, what does it say again? F28. L
28, yeah.
Basically 28 if. He would have been 28 if he was alive.
Linda McCartney widowed.
Linda McCartney widowed, yes. was he married at that point? Was it 69 he got married?
Probably, yeah. Probably was.
It was very
you've got the meat van in there as well on the right hand.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot going on in there in terms of symbolism. I think by this point they were acutely, if they weren't aware, by 67. He's out of step as well. Yeah, that's the other classic one. Yep. He's out of step. I think if they weren't aware by 67, by this point they were certainly aware of this conspiracy theory, and they were doubling down hardcore and really going for it, giving them everything they could possibly give. I don't think there's any audio. Is there any audio sort of stuff going on? And I don't think there's anything in Abbey Road. Not that I'm aware of. Obviously, as we move into the post-Beatles stuff, we've got It's Johnny's Birthday. He never wore his shoes, we all know he was dead. Connecting into the cover. And obviously it's George Harrison singing that. But then, you've got to realise George had fallen out with Beatle Head, I think they were calling him at that point. Or Ed, I can never determine. That Scouse accent befuddled me. But the Imagine documentary, John and George, best buddies at that point before they fell out as well. And they hated Paul at that point, so I don't know if you can read too far. I don't know how far in to George's career It's Johnny's Birthday was. I've not really delved deeply into that side of it. I have heard the song. But there's little clues linger even after the Beatles' time as a band.
Yeah. How do you keep John the lyrics? Those freaks were right when they said you were dead. Lennon on the nose. It's not even. He's not like dancing around the subject. He's saying it as it is.
Yep. Which is classic John Lennon, and he's essentially saying, "Look, you're dead to me, bitch." He's not saying he's literally dead. I don't think that's why he's saying freaks. But Stephen, it's all very interesting. Obviously, in terms of clues, and I've got a thing at the side here where they're saying, obviously, we kind of touched on that earlier on, broader tapestry of 60s paranoia, this mistrust of the state and of authority and of anything really. There's a real rebellious nature about society and culture at this point in terms of fashion and sort of sexual promiscuity, is that the word, promiscuity? And just dabbling with drugs, experimental psychedelic drugs like acid and all sorts of other stuff. You've got people like Keith Richards and John Lennon dabbling with heroin and things like that at this point. So there was a lot of that rampant in the 60s. And there was a real sort of melting pot of conspiracies and conspiratorial culture in the 60s. So we kind of dabbled on that. But I mean, I guess in terms of what I would take away from this part in terms of the bullet points we've got, obviously it's placed in Beatles lore and music history. We know that it's synonymous with the Beatles and their legacy as a band now. People think of that, they immediately think of Paul is dead. Maybe not everyone, but it's something that's lingered long enough that most people who have followed this band are aware of it. But I think the biggest takeaway is the idea of reading too much into art, intentional versus perceived meaning. And obviously this goes even darker and deeper with the Beatles in the White Album era, when you've got Charles Manson reading into Helter Skelter and using that as allegedly a catalyst for going and committing the Tate murder and all the other horrific crimes that him and his sort of family did. So this was something in this era that was widespread. We kind of dabbled with it with I Am the Walrus and John poking fun at these, sort of, I don't know, experts poring over their lyrics and finding deeper meaning. Do you think that's something that played a large part in this conspiracy theory getting off the ground? People looking deep into the Beatles, they were the sort of pioneers in terms of studio stuff and effects and chord structures and changing the sort of fabric of music. Do you think they were looking deep into the lyrics and maybe happened upon it? Or do you think
so, John. I think the evidence was clear in the Imagine documentary with the homeless guy turning up on John Lennon's doorstep, reading too much into the lyrics. And I think the lyrics, "Boy, you're going to carry that weight," was actually Paul's lyrics. But no, I think it's just I just think they had that much influence on youth, in particular, and to an extent. I'm not saying the Beatles intentionally tried to mislead or abuse power or anything like that when they were writing lyrics. Certainly, I think if you're going to take things literally, then that's not really on the Beatles as the writers. But certainly, I think some people just look too deep into these things in terms of lyrics and what they mean. And in terms of lyrics, I mean, most music is interpreted the way you want it to be interpreted. You believe what you want to believe in it, I think that's just snowballed back then. This was just something that really took off. And in an age before internet, it's phenomenal to know how much this spread across the world. This rumour, you can't deny how big this rumour was, and how much legs it grew over the years as well, right into the 1990s, and then spilling onto the internet and becoming a thing again, and I think that's its sort of legacy, is obviously it's just continual, and that's based on the Beatles lyrics mostly, and obviously the images that we've been talking about as well.
It just goes, Stephen, I think that goes to show you the brilliance of the Beatles as a sort of artistic, I keep using this word tonight, entity. I don't know why this is my word for tonight. But I think it just goes to show you the brilliance that they went from this sort of, I don't know, heartthrob pop beat band from Liverpool to being this if I can use it again, band that changed the world, I think, for the better with their lyrics and their musical output. They became a completely different thing, and it's something I think is the benchmark for all music and all artists that came afterwards. You can be this samey act that goes through your sort of career, churning out the same old kind of stuff, or you can choose to be experimental, start off as something and end as something completely different. And certainly and it's something that always fucking wound me up when I used to argue with people about the Beatles, why they didn't rate them, they're just this, they're just that. I'm like, you have not listened to that band from start to finish. Their journey is extraordinary, from even the late 50s, but certainly 63, 62 through to 1970, extraordinary. And the fact that people are looking and pouring into those lyrics 50 years later looking for conspiracy theories, I think it's extraordinary. Stephen, the actual images though, these are the things that I always found the most interesting. And I've done this with a whole host of other things. Obviously Prince Harry and his sort of provenance, whether Charles was his father, people posting photos up of that guy who was a sort of admirer of Princess Diana back in the day, the ginger-haired guy, and people putting side-by-side photos.
Can't remember his name, James something.
Yeah. It's something I love. And to be fair, there's a real science in it, because your face is what it is, your bone structure is what it is, and it can't really change all that much. Your skin can sag, you can get puffy eyes, you get older, things change. Your ears keep growing, your nose keeps growing, that never stops. Your hairstyles can change. But really, where your eyes are positioned, where your chins are, plural, where your cheeks are, where your chin is, where your jaw is set, is pretty much permanent. in an individual unless they're involved in a really bad accident, which, to be fair, Paul was involved in. It wasn't that bad, but he was involved in an accident, like you said, where he had to grow a moustache out. This kind of stuff fascinates me, Stephen, because you can see here, I mean, there is subtle variations, but lighting and camera angles can change things widely or wildly. And we've seen this with thumbnails.
John, there's some thumbnails where I look fat-faced, and there's other ones where I look more gaunt, and I'm like, I don't know how that is.
And Stephen, I'm sitting in the same position, and I can take similar kind of sort of screenshot, and I try to line it up with a thumbnail taken from a video that was recorded 10 minutes earlier, and it doesn't match up. So I know firsthand that you can take an image of someone minutes apart, and there'll be variations just because of the angle, the lighting, the way they're sort of looking or whatever.
So lenses as well.
This is fucking years apart.
Yeah. Different cameras.
Different cameras, different lighting. The one of young Paul McCartney, I don't know why they're saying 18 to 24, because that's fucking mad. He's not 18 to 24. He's a specific age here. It looks very young. I can't pinpoint the exact age, but it looks like very early 60s. Clearly, yeah, it's very, very early. Very lightly lit. Not a lot of sort of shadows in there. You can barely see lines in the face. You don't have much at that age, to be fair. A lot darker, flatter image, and that can do a lot. But certainly you look at the eyebrows and the general shape's the same. The eyes are pretty much the same. Paul always had that kind of like crescent to his eyes. Nose shape kind of looks the same. There is ones where you go and you think, well, this is what I was talking about, where you're like, fucking chin looks a bit dodgy. And it's a year apart, so it's not that drastic a time difference. But again, he may have lost weight. They were dabbling with drugs at this time.
Yeah.
The diet may have fluctuated. They were very busy, very stressed. They were getting older. People in that era aged really quickly. No, I don't recall.
No, I think that looks...
Yeah.
That looks weird.
Photoshopped.
It's almost like Jimmy Hill.
It could be weight loss. You can clearly see Stephen 66. He's a lot puffier in the Jimmy Hill. A lot puffier in the face, right up to the sort of eyes. Here he's lost a bit of weight. The haircut was a little bit different. Obviously the eyebrow, that was the crash, wasn't it? Was that fucking Ringo? And that was Ringo. Here, really small image. Wow. I mean, again, I don't think they're doing their argument much good here. No. When the point is...
The ears.
Yeah. The ears are the fucking same.
Identical. Yeah, same position. Same shape.
And he's 40 here.
Yeah.
He's 39, 40 here. He's maybe not 40, but he's about 38. I think that's from 1980, round about that era. It's like coming up here.
Coming up video, John, you've talked about the coming up video.
Yeah, I'm going to try and find it just now. I've seen an image.
Impersonates himself.
Yeah. There you go. That image there, coming up. 1980. Obviously he's older, but you can see, and Stephen, that's what I was going to get into when I says bookmarking that sort of mentally. What you said about, if you pardon me.
Looks like a bootlegs Beatle, Paul McCartney.
He does, doesn't he? Yeah, that little short guy. Yeah, he's a great musician, but fucking hell. It's like Ben Kingsley playing Adolf Eichmann when he was my age, and he's like 70. Fucking hell. No, behave yourself. But what he says about John in 66, 67, how I won the war, getting away, cutting his hair, growing out the facial sort of hair, and how that had a lot of people wondering what had happened. Is this the same guy? I think a large part, this guy, I think he's hit the nail on the head when he says, I think that one of the main reasons Paul looks so different from 66 to 68 is because of a haircut. I really don't think you can underestimate how important it is in terms of haircut, the way you part your hair. Young Paul McCartney parted it kind of flat to the right. As he got older, he started doing like a middle part. He grew his hair out. He was parting to the left. Human beings, by their very nature, are not symmetrical in the face or anywhere. There's differences from the right side to the left side, the forehead, the head shape. Something as subtle as changing the way you part your hair can completely change the way you look and how you're perceived by people. The eyes are naturally drawn to one side of the face. You do something different, completely changes the way you're perceived by people. And you can see it here. This is the full Paul McCartney, the fake Paul McCartney, he's doing the middle part thing. Party's here to the left. You go to younger Paul, he's partly here to the right. And it's more flatter. Flatter to the right. So, different haircuts. Texture in the hair, like John did. Doing centre parts. Completely changes the structure, the look of the face, the way the face is perceived. They've got older, they've lost weight. So, I mean, we're getting at the sort of end stages here, Stephen, of this sort of discussion.
Yeah. And I think anyone who watched this from start to finish will now see the sort of change in our perception of this whole conspiracy, John, and where it's going now. And I think presenting those images is key to it. But also presenting sort of present time, and not just present time. When you look back at obviously photographs of Paul and his brother Mike with their father.
Yeah, I'll bring that up. You know what,
Father
I'll
is
bring that up just now.
the father is the John.
I'll try and fucking type in a more coherent manner. Paul McCartney, father. Fucking hell, I can't type it out. And you look at Paul now.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, it doesn't look that quite like that. I mean, that's that image you posted, Stephen, famously on that group. And if you look at Paul McCartney now, he looks like his father. He's starting to get older looking. He's got more hair. But he's starting to look like his father. And you can see the resemblance growing and growing. The man's now 82 years of age. He is an old man now. And I think that's when you start to realise that, look, I'm going to try and be political here, but it's not true. It's not true. It's definitely Paul McCartney. definitely it's Paul McCartney. Let's not beat about the fucking bush here. He did. I'm not sitting. No, I mean, it's an interesting conspiracy, Steve, and it's lasted a long time. People believe really fervently in it, and I respect the passion they've got for it, and the dedication and the images and looking for clues and trying to piece it all together. But ultimately, I think it's fucking bollocks. I really do believe Paul is Paul.
Yeah, I mean, as much as we believe that, we've said obviously organisations could maybe attempt to do this, to do that over a longer period of time and have everyone, including their families, including the remaining, the surviving members of the Beatles and people connected to them, all in it. Is the key here. It's really that's the key, and to keep that conspiracy going for the best part of 5 decades is no mean task. But you're right, John. I think this is the point, obviously, in the show where we just have to, debunk it now, and we have done that for the past 5-10 minutes. And I think, just looking at the sort of legacy of Paul McCartney as a whole, consistency in terms of his work ethic, consistency of his writing style and his melodies, if it always remained the same.
Yeah.
The songs will obviously be different because that's what songwriting's all about if you're good at it. But in terms of obviously those traits and the traits that he's had throughout his life remain, and what we see is obviously, in his public image have always been as consistent as possible. It's interesting, John. I don't believe it, but it's interesting. It's something that I always keep an open mind about. Because every now and again there'll be something else that'll come up that'll go, I'll go, that's interesting. Yeah. And then I'll read about it and I'll see what the conclusion is and weigh up the pros and cons of that conspiracy. But I think it's fascinating. I think it's even more fascinating that even in 2025 people are still debating this. That's the most interesting thing about this, and it's not lost its edge. People are passionate about this, and if you go into those YouTube channels in the comment section, they really do believe that conspiracy happening. Listen, I appreciate that. I appreciate the passion for that and sticking to their beliefs. I don't believe it, but listen, I would never write anything off.
Steve, I think it all comes down to your perception on the person as well. If you're more inclined to like Paul, and I love all the Beatles. I love all the side players in the Beatles. Neil Aspinall, fucking Derek Taylor. I always mix his name up and call him Dick for some reason. Mal Evans. I love all of the figures involved in the Beatles sort of bandwagon. George Martin, Jeff Emerick, all the fucking people that made the magic happen. I'm fascinated by it all. But there is people who naturally side with one or the other. If you're more predisposed to not like Paul, then perhaps you'll find a sort of an in for maybe justifying that dislike. Well, he died in 66. So it's a fake Paul, so that's why I don't like him now. So maybe that's a reason, a rationale. Maybe people genuinely just believe in it. I don't know. But I was going to say something. Yeah, but what you say is something will pop up every now and again and you'll be like, that's quite interesting. I had a shot on YouTube the other day. Don't know how it came up because I've not been searching it up. Clearly listening to what we're saying. There's a conspiracy theory. Bezos, you baldy bastard. I can say that because I'm a baldy. Get more hair than Bezos though, just getting closer to the skin man every day. But it came up and it was a question asked to Paul, a young Paul. Was there ever a point growing up where he wanted to do anything else? And he says, nope, always wanted to be a singer, a songwriter, a musician. Yeah. He was adamant. And then he was asked the same question. I can't remember who it by. It may have been Parkinson. I don't think it was, though. It was something later on. And he says, no, I wanted to be a teacher. Again, you can say it's 60 years or 50 years has passed. It's a natural sort of aging process. Maybe the mind's not as clear as it was when you were younger.
I think that interview, the initial one, John, was when they were just breaking through in America, and obviously the perception of the Beatles was probably a more important thing for Paul McCartney and the rest of them as well. When they were getting interviewed, they make sure, no, this is all we ever wanted to do, and this is what we set out to do, and we're doing it. Whereas, in hindsight, that second interview, people probably know him better through the interviews, over the past maybe 2 decades since that previous one, the first interview. So he's had time to reflect, and I'm not saying he's a liar or anything. I actually do believe that perhaps maybe he did consider going into teaching at one point. But I think when you're young and you're trying to build a persona, a image at that period in their career, they're going to stick to the guns. I think the good example nowadays is probably the Gallagher brothers that continually do that. It's rock and roll. It's all about the rock and roll. It's all about image. And I think that's where probably Paul's head and his mindset was at that point in that first interview.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he was young and well up for it, and they were doing wisecracks and whatnot. And they had to create this persona of being sort of too cool for school. And with all due respect to teachers, it's not really that cool being a teacher. It's much cooler being Paul McCartney and the Beatles. So you're not going to say it.
In terms of teachers back in the 1950s, John, they were seen as bastards, let's be honest.
Yeah, exactly. Assaulting you with belts and whatnot.
The perception of teaching was probably a bit different.
And see, I mean, I'm looking to the left. Obviously, we've got this sort of structure. Obviously, I discovered the Avril Lavigne one fairly recently. That she was cloned. That's fucking mad. So this is something we're seeing even in modern times. And obviously, Elvis still being alive, Tupac still being alive. So it's not just something specific to Paul.
Home Alone.
What was that? Sorry.
Was in Home Alone.
Elvis was in Home Alone.
Yeah. Yeah, you need to check that one out.
Was he?
Yeah.
Was he? Yeah, Elvis was in Home Alone. I need to search it out just now.
1990. How it look in 1990?
Fucking hell. I mean, it's clearly not Elvis, but...
What is it?
I don't know. It kind of looks like a random Scottish guy you would see in Parkhead. Just looks like it. Not having that, Elvis. But Stephen, what it is, it's very interesting that it's stuck around despite multiple attempts by multiple people to sort of dispel it and put it down as being sort of tinfoil hat stuff. People are absolutely adamant, they're fervent in their desire to out this. And also, we've had even the likes of that fucking crackpot he was married to, no legs, I forget her fucking name, clown, can't go on, Heather Mills. Is that her name? Is it? She says, he told me a secret that would absolutely shake the world. And one day I'll reveal it. Well, why have you not revealed it then? Because he's divorced you. So you've got no reason not to reveal it. So even though you've got little things that happen and people are like, oh my God, he is dead. But no, for me, I think it's absolute bollocks. I'm not going to sit in the fence any longer. I fundamentally believe it's the same guy. You do not simply, to quote Sean Bean's Boromir from The Lord of the Rings, one does not simply take a double from Canada and replace the great James Paul McCartney with him. It's not that simple. This isn't a mere mortal that you're replacing. This isn't, with all due respect, Alex Turner or fucking Mick Jagger. This is Paul McCartney. We're talking about a 40-instrumental musician, one of the greatest melodists, I argue the greatest melodic mind to ever walk the earth, one of the greatest singer-songwriters with one of the greatest vocal ranges, very distinct looks, very distinct gait, very distinct personality. I hinted at it with the Get Back stuff, a propensity for climbing on things when he could, and that's something that you could see all the way through his life. So no, I'm absolutely certain it's Paul McCartney. I absolutely believe they were switched on very early on in the 60s about interest in the lyrics, and they were deliberately planting things in there for people to find. Scousers are very mischievous beasts, very clever, very witty people, much like us Glaswegians. I think they knew what they were doing. I think it's a big conspiracy theory created by the Beatles themselves, and I don't think it's fucking true. But look, just because I don't think it's true doesn't mean you don't have to think it's true. What is your thoughts on the whole Paul is dead thing? I think we've done hashtag the Walrus the Walrus was who. That's a great title, by the way. The Walrus was who. That is brilliant. Love that. Stephen came up with that. That was his brainchild. Stephen is the man that's sort of got connections in that medium, and he knows what he's doing, and he knows how to find those sort of interesting little headlines, titles, if you'd like. The Walrus was who? Who do you think the Walrus was? John says it was Paul. Paul probably says it was John. I think John says it was fucking him as well. When I think about it.
I say that I am the Walrus.
Yeah, I know, but I'm thinking about dream is over. What can I say? Dream is over. Yesterday I was a dream maker. Weaver. Now I am gone. I was the Walrus. Now I am John. Make your mind up, John, for fuck's sake. Dream's over. I digress, the dream is over. What is your thoughts? Share your thoughts down below about Paul is dead. You think he's dead? You think it's Billy Campbell from Canada? You think you replaced Paul? Who do you think's the best, by the way? Because that's a whole other conversation. I still maintain if it is a fall, then Fall's better than the original Paul. Because the output of Paul, post-66, his influence grew in the group. His output grew. Oh, it was always fucking great, but Sgt. Pepper's, Oh Darling, Let It Be. So many great songs they brought out after that point. Blackbird, Mother Nature's Son. The list is endless. Helter Skelter. I'd argue it was better. I digress. What was your thoughts? Share them down below on our discussion on the conspiracy theory on Paul. Anything you want to share, pop it down below in the comments section. That's the place to put your thoughts. Like the video if you've enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to get notifications, and all that's left to be said. Until next time, thank you for watching us, and bye-bye.